Super. So you're being recorded now, but it's mostly me and Alasdair who are being recorded. So we are going to keep those cameras off. We're going to keep muted, but if you have a question, then you can raise your hand and we can ask you to unmute and ask your question, or you can type that question in the chat. And we really hope that you will interact with us and ask us questions. We are here today to answer any questions that you might have about studying geography at Royal Holloway. So if you have any general questions, then you can ask us, okay? So Alasdair is our lead for undergraduate recruitment within the School of Life Sciences and Environment, and I am running the school's liaison and outreach work that we do within the department. So we are well placed to answer any specific questions. So you can type them into the chat, or you can raise your hand. We will invite you to unmute, and then you can ask your questions there. Okay. Right, so we have a few exciting things coming up. We have Alasdair Pinkerton going to be talking about superpower geopolitics. We're going to start that video at about 10:15, and then we're going to have a break after that video. I'll leave the Zoom running, but you can just pop off, get a cup of tea, have a comfort break, and then come back. We'll restart at 11. And we're going to talk about glaciers and climate change in Antarctica. And that's going to be a lecture with me and our colleague, Professor Klaus Dodds. And we're going to be talking about not only the Antarctic ice sheet, but also the geopolitics of Antarctica. You might think it's very far away, but we're going to talk about why it's important to British sovereign territories. And then at 11:30, so after Klaus's lecture, we'll be talking about humans and the climate crisis. It is very relevant right now. We're seeing the hottest temperatures ever recorded in British Columbia for what, 3-4 days in a row, is it now, Alasdair?
That's right. Yeah, nearly a week actually.
And wildfires being triggered by these hot temperatures. These are very clear, very immediate impacts of climate change. These events are so hot, they're very unlikely to have risen by chance. This is being attributed directly to increasing greenhouse gases in our atmosphere and increasing temperatures. So Professor Ian Candy's lecture on humans and the climate crisis is going to be very relevant to that. From 12 o'clock, we're going to have a discussion about our video competition. We've had some entrants to the video competition. I will give you a chance to watch those videos. I'll play them probably through my computer so we can watch them. And then we are going to award a prize, a certificate to our winning entrants. We're going to come back at 1:10 for the virtual tour led by Dr. Pinkerton. He's going to take you on a tour all around college and show you some of the best features of our beautiful campus. And we're going to follow that at 1:30 with Professor Ian Candy again, who's going to take us on a tour around the Department of Geography. And then at 13:45, Alasdair and I will be giving a discussion of competition entries, and we will award a certificate for the best competition entry. And then we'll have another break and the final video at 2:15, and then we'll wrap up by 3 o'clock today. Are there any questions on those timetables? You should have that timetable. I send it to you in an email many times, so hopefully you've all received that timetable. If there are any questions, raise your hand or type in the chat. Okay, well, whilst you're thinking about questions, Alasdair, maybe you could give us a couple of pointers of things to bear in mind or think about whilst we're watching your video on superpower geopolitics.
Yeah, what I hope people will see in the video that's going to come on are things that really resonate with them. Superpowers, we might think about superpower geopolitics as something that's happened in the past, and as I will talk about in that lecture, I will talk about the Cold War, when there was a very clear kind of superpower dynamic. But we're living in an era of incredibly dynamic change, and we have ebbing superpowers, arguably, so powers, countries that seem to be declining in power and authority in the world, sometimes just because their power seems to be dwindling, other times, because, particularly in the context of the United States under Donald Trump, a country that very deliberately took a step back from its previous role in the world as the kind of the world's leading superpower. Under Joe Biden, arguably, we're seeing the United States slightly reassert its global leadership role again. But we also see the rise of new powers. And nobody can have failed to notice the rise of China over recent years, but people also speculate about the rise of India to potential superpower status in years to come. Now, a few weeks ago, Britain sent a military vessel through very close to the Crimea in the Black Sea, and that prompted quite an interesting kind of near-military encounter between Britain and Russia. But what many people also think is that that is really a bit of a precursor to a continuing naval mission that Britain is currently engaged in to send a naval fleet to the Far East, to Japan and through the South China Sea. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to keep looking at that particular part of the world over the next few months to see how China responds to the British presence, the British naval presence in the South China Sea. Britain, of course, no longer a superpower as it once was, but people accusing Britain of acting in a kind of neo-colonial, neo-imperial kind of way. And certainly China, I'm actually just looking on my other screen at a really interesting article that's been written in the Chinese Global Times this morning, all about Britain and its failure to get over its colonial past. And in particular, pointing a finger at the Malvinas, at the Falkland Islands and Malvinas dispute as an example of that. So China is looking to really assert itself on the global stage, but yet you've also got powers like Britain who are continuing to try to keep China in a particular geopolitical position. So what I hope people will hear in this lecture today are things that resonate with them, that sound familiar, but also perhaps puts a little bit more flesh in the bone to understand where some of the current contestation comes from.
Okay, that's super. And this, I mean, geopolitics is really driving everything about our global politics at the moment. It's been the driving force behind Brexit, driving force behind the Falklands War, which you referred to the Malvinas or the Falkland Islands. I mean, geopolitics really is, if we don't understand geopolitics, we can't understand modern day politics. We can't understand why things happen or what happens.
I gave a lecture for the Geographical Association that went out last week, and I started off that lecture by saying that geopolitics is absolutely everywhere. I mean, we're surrounded by it. You open up any newspaper on any given day and there will be some articles that talk explicitly about geopolitics. If you open the Geographical magazine, for example, some of you may be subscribers or your schools might be subscribers, there's a geopolitical hotspot in every edition of that journal. There are geopolitical analysts working for major banks and oil companies and anybody doing business anywhere in the world. They're obsessed with geopolitics and geopolitical risk. So yeah, it surrounds us all the time. And so that's why also a lot of my students from my geopolitics courses are going into those industries. But sometimes people don't understand the history and origins of geopolitical thinking. And that's one of the things that I want to try and get at in this morning's lecture. Where do some of these ideas and presumptions about the world come from? How do we frame and seek to imagine the world in particular kind of ways? And there are some countries that are particularly adept at doing that. Britain in its imperial past, United States during the Cold War, and I would also argue China today, think geostrategically in the world. So hopefully these will be some of the things that come out in this morning's lecture.
Okay, and there was a couple of things there that you mentioned that I'd like to draw on. You talked about some of your geopolitics students and where they've gone and the kind of careers they've done. Do you think we've got like just a minute left before the video? Yeah. Do you think you could expand on that a little bit about where, a degree in geography at Royal Holloway, where could that take you?
Well, I mean, some of my students have gone on and they've done a conversion course and they've become they've gone into accountancy or financial management, and I know that they're using their geopolitics training to think about global flows of finance and geopolitical risk for big organizations, whether they be PwC or other big international management houses. I've got students who are working in the British government, in the Cabinet Office, in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, for example, who are again thinking about the way that we talk and narrate the world. And in particular, Of course, Britain took a very bold decision a few years ago to completely realign its international relationships. And so many of my students are working on thinking about how Britain can project itself in new kinds of ways in the world, whether that be through trade or through the arts and creativity sectors. But also the way that Britain manages its new kind of risk portfolio. You know, how does Britain want to act in the modern world? Does it want to continue to assert to keep maritime lanes open, as arguably the exercise that was conducted a few weeks ago in the Crimea was all about? Or does it need to settle into a kind of second order military role where it plays more of a supporting kind of role? So, you know, Britain is at this pivot point itself. It doesn't quite know what global Britain really means yet. I'm delighted to say that some of my students are out there in the world attempting to work out what terms like that really mean and how Britain is going to act in the future.
Okay, so extremely relevant, extremely topical. Let's watch the video.
Okay. Thanks, Bethan.